last speaker in this session is Phil McKeiver. Phil is the Principal Counsel at Gilbert+Tobin, and his talk is titled Managing Risks on African Resource Projects, Be Remembered in Your Organisation for the Right Reasons. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Bill. So I've been doing major projects and mega projects for about 30 years across mining, infrastructure, processing, non-processing, rail, port, roads, and everything in between. It's a great type of work to do. I love the complexity, I love the diversity. Every project is different. Every organisation's risk profile is different. And so there's plenty to do, and plenty to do at the moment, especially in Africa, given the sort of the mini boom that we're currently dealing with. So I'm going to talk about a few different themes in this material. Let's see if I can pass it. Why is it not moving? Here we go. Okay, so we'll talk generally about the basic principles of project delivery and managing risk on major and mega projects. Then we'll talk about the African context, both the key issues that you find in those jurisdictions and some of the key risks and ways to mitigate them. If time permits, we'll also talk about funding considerations in Africa and Chinese involvement in African resources projects, which, as you know, is booming. Obviously, we could talk for hours on any one of these topics, so this is intended to be an overview, and if you have any queries, please come and see me afterwards. I'm happy to send you the pack and to talk you through the detail. So just a little bit of a plug. Gilbert+Tobin has been working in Africa for over 30 years, and my colleague Michael Blackston, it's probably fair to say, who's sitting in the fourth row there, is the doyen of legal counsel advising African focused miners and projects. And so we're very fortunate to have him in the firm and others. So what are major projects and mega projects? Well, they're not for the faint-hearted. And let's face it, managing risk is essential on a project because it typically takes you out of the business-as-usual scenario. Stakeholder expectations are high, timeframes are severe, and there are multiple interfaces, for example, which often lead to major projects being several and not just one. By definition, the organisation has the limited ability to take on all the risk itself, and it may be lacking certain expertise and personnel, which can be expensive to obtain. Now, these risks, as you would know, are magnified on African resources projects, or they need to be dealt with differently for different reasons. So applying a business-as-usual approach to any project is risky. Applying a business-as-usual approach to a project in Africa is even more risky. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted. Simple stuff, but you ignore it at your peril. Anyone who's worked on a large project understands that you cannot get everything that you ask for. If you've got limited time, you probably find that the cost will be higher, the quality will be less. You need to understand your risk profile, and you need to work within that framework, which is effectively the project laws of physics. You can't get more for less. Often it will take what it takes, and it'll cost what it costs. And to try and sort of take shortcuts, you'll need to make compromises. Stating the obvious, your opportunity to improve and impact the level of quality, stakeholder expectations, project outcomes, and reduce risk. If you do that work up front, it'll be a lot easier, a lot less painful, a lot cheaper. Your ability to influence the outcomes of the project favourably are massively greater at the beginning than they are towards the end. And you'll see that hockey stick climbing there. A similar sort of example here is easy to say when you're raising funds and you may not have funds, but spending a little bit of time and resources up front will save you a massive amount of risk, time and cost and sort of heartache at the back end. So managing risks on major projects. Well, you start with your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? And obviously in the African context, there'll be some unique ones to deal with. They're all there, I won't list them. In the African context, of course, NGOs, the community, government, regulators and authorities all have an important part to play, as do off-takers. And it's critical before starting any major project, to really work on your stakeholder management plans, to understand what the needs, requirements, issues, hot buttons are of all the stakeholders. And there are always many more than you initially think. So if you avoid dealing with a stakeholder at the front end and understanding their requirements, you will have to deal with them at the back end when they're saying no to something that you need or getting in the way. So what are risks? They're many and varied. They can be delivery risks, technical risks, scope creep, which leads to cost and time delays, financial risks, offtake, credit risks, occupational health and safety, and a myriad of legal, regulatory and other issues, as well as reputational risks. And when we look at Africa, we're obviously talking about an increased political risk, sovereign risk and credit risk issues. Stating the obvious, managing these risks, it's risk management on steroids working in Africa. And so you need people who understand the African environment, the African context, and have some experience doing it and managing sort of these pitfalls. And effectively, you need to take a holistic and integrated approach to managing risk on major projects. Just dealing with one issue, but not taking into account another one, will lead to sort of problems in the future that you need to deal with. So, how do you manage all these risks and integrate them? You need to have a uniform culture and leadership, shared objectives, strong governance, strong monitoring and reporting, clear roles and responsibilities across the organisation and the project team, proper scope definition, and obviously appropriate contracting and partner strategies and resourcing. So, the African context. Africa is not for the faint-hearted, but the opportunities are considerable. But we ignore African politics, African sort of tribalism, African history at our peril. It's wrong for us to apply completely Western concepts and Australian sort of expectations uniformly without understanding the history, the local dynamics and all the issues that come into play. So, we shouldn't be looking down on Africans. We should be looking to, build a bridge of knowledge and understanding and shared sort of expectations so that we can move forward. Time, this is perhaps a little bit pessimistic, but I think we're all aware that it can take longer to get things done in Africa. So applying an Australian sort of prism can be problematic and can certainly hurt your business and cost you a lot of money. I won't go into great detail on that, but I think we'll talk about that through the rest of the slides anyway. Needless to say, sovereign risk issues, political risk issues are considered to be extreme in the African region, and you need to manage that. And how do you manage that? It may be some political risk insurance, it may be through a range of different sort of legal and regulatory tools, which we'll talk about in a moment. These are the sorts of issues that do come up regularly and can be magnified on African projects in our experience. So, needless to say, you've got to get the right local partners in place and the appropriate delivery models. Government issues can be considerable, and I think the guys who've just spoken have sort of touched on some of those. Safety, physical security, access to transport, the right people, power, water, etc., are all considerable and need to be managed carefully. The legal regimes are multiple, complex, and overlapping. And so you need someone who understands the various uniform codes in the various jurisdictions and the different interplays of laws that apply. The sorts of things that will come up obviously will be bribery and corruption, need to be dealt with as they can significantly damage the reputation of the organisation and lead to criminal liability, as you know. You need to think very carefully as to how you may make payments, and certainly for some of our clients we've had legislation put in place which requires us and permits us to make payments for clients to make payments so that it's all legal and above board. Obviously your documentation, your convention, your development agreement, your state agreement, your investment agreement is essential in managing risk, to mitigate the risk of expropriation, ministerial discretions, issues like changes in law, and to ensure the sort of the waiver of state immunities, etc., and to provide for external arbitration with a well-recognised and resourced body outside of the jurisdiction. Taxation is important, as you would know. Withholding tax regimes in some of these countries are quite significant, and it can be a significant impost on your bottom line if you record the early stage capital costs of that work. And there are ways and means to address those issues, but they need to be dealt with carefully. Bilateral treaties are obviously very important, and Mauritius has done a pretty good job of putting in place bilateral investment treaties with lots of African nations, which may be able to be leveraged if you establish yourself in Mauritius, a subsidiary in Mauritius. Access to political risk insurance, export credit risk insurance can be hard to get and expensive to get, depending on the location and the sector. But there are things that you need to do to manage the various risks that you have. The contract is only takes you so far, and so you need to put as much of this in place as you can reasonably afford and obtain in the market. Arrangements for the repatriation of funds and the ability to use foreign personnel, the requirements of local content, all need to be considered as well. So some key takeaways on the project side of things: shared culture and objectives, a lot of work done up front around stakeholder management, anticipating key risks and avoiding surprises, and strong governance and resourcing are essential to manage risks in any major project, but particularly in Africa. So then quickly touching on sort of funding arrangements. As we know, it can be hard to get funding. There's almost no chance of getting funding in country. And so there's always a need to look at the funding models and provide innovative solutions in the context of doing deals and raising money for African projects. They're the same sorts of issues, but they're magnified in Africa, we've found. So in terms of the landscape, your ability to obtain infrastructure or build infrastructure, your route to market and your offtake arrangements are as important as the physicals of the project itself, so ignore those at your peril. The project economics must be compelling and robust to handle the inevitable slippages and the increased risk profile. Legal enforcement prospects are low, so additional mitigations are required. And because it's a cross-border funding environment, you need specialist advisors and funding solutions. And you need local champions to get anything done and to give that additional level of comfort and certainty. You also need quality off-takers at the early stage. You need alignment of interest across your various project participants. And the more fungible the resource, the better. So if it's gold, it's basically money. If it's a bulk commodity, it's much harder to trade and to deliver to market, etc. So with a couple of minutes that we have left, I just thought I'd touch briefly on the Chinese involvement in African projects, and we're seeing more and more of it. I mean, there's so much focus going into Africa at the moment from China for a whole range of reasons, including the One Belt, One Road initiative. And in terms of the number, and there's no surprises here, this reflects China's growing demand for resources and its pursuit of new consumer markets as well as business opportunities, as well as to maximise China's global influence and its soft power. The numbers are staggering. If you look at the last bullet point, China is involved in 50 new port projects. 50% of Chinese contractor revenues are coming from Africa. There's a massive, massive shift of focus into Africa for all the reasons we understand. And so what does that mean? So that means you need to, if you are working, and we've worked for many clients who've either procured some services or equipment from Africa or used Chinese partners. So you need to be aware of the cultural issues, timelines for negotiating deals. There's a unique way to bargain and negotiate with the Chinese, as you probably know, and the importance of building strong relationships cannot be overstated. So we've actually managed to do it within 15 minutes. I was surprised. I hope that's been helpful. There's a lot of detail in there, but please feel free to make contact after the talk. Thank you.